So the one thing I did want to talk about, definitely before the end of the show, was I have discussed the individual who named me Liberal Dan before. I used to call into a radio show, and every time I would call in, I'd be like, hey, this is Dan from Algiers, or Dan from New Orleans, or Dan from Kenner, wherever it was I was living at the time. Usually it was Dan from Algiers for this particular show. And the host would be like, oh, look, it is. It's Liberal Dan. And so I would meet people out and about. I was working at one of my former employers, and there was a new hire, and we were all having drinks after he officially had his first day. And his boss was there and was like, now that you're hired, I can ask you what your political views are. And he goes, oh, I'm kind of a libertarian. And one of the other guys that was there was like, yes, because he was also a libertarian-minded person. The boss is like, well, the boss is like, I'm conservative, but I think I'm growing more liberal as I get older. And he goes, but this guy over here, he's Liberal Dan. And the guy's like, wait, Liberal Dan from the radio? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to go home and tell my wife that I work with Liberal Dan. And there were other experiences like that, where I would talk to people and they would be like, oh, you're Liberal Dan? Oh my God. That's what ultimately was my muse to create liberaldan.com, to look into doing the podcast. That's why I started doing on Blog Talk Radio. Eventually started making the videos as well on YouTube. So yeah, all because of another radio host, a conservative radio host, for naming me Liberal Dan. Well, that individual apparently was found dead in the apartment. I think it was Saturday, right before New Year's. Again, we were not that close, but I was still a little shook to find out about the death. I was also shook to find out about the fact that she is a trans woman, because when she was on the radio doing her radio shtick, she was not out. She was closeted for a very long time on the radio, and I'm not going to discuss. I've brought up and said her name previously. A lot of the people talking about her, even people who knew her as Rebecca Pratt, have used both names interchangeably. There was one article locally that did talk about the fact that, talking about the fact that it was Rebecca Pratt that died, and that Rebecca Pratt was known as so-and-so on, 99.5 or Bayou 95.7, or Bayou 99.5 or Bayou 95.7, had shows on those two stations and was known as so-and-so, and then up north was known as so-and-so as well. But the rest of the newscasts were using the show name, the name that was used, the person's birth name. And I'm not necessarily going to say a dead name, because it's hard to say that it's a dead name simply because that person was actively using her radio show name professionally for a while, although she also did, I think later on before she passed, came on somebody's show and did a show like, as her true self. So like I was very surprised to find out her name, Rebecca Pratt, to find out that she was a trans woman, to find out that she apparently has been living like this since 2011. Her profile on Facebook has been active since 2011. It says, I'm a transgender woman on there, and there are pictures of her out and about in New Orleans with her friends, and there's a YouTube video or two where she's just being her real self. And I'm a little saddened that I didn't know, because I would have liked to have gotten to know, and I would have liked to have felt that I would have been somebody that she could have confided in. One of the other guys that was on the radio with her, I think he said that she was the first one that he came out to because he's gay, and he I guess was married before and was closeted, and he came out to her a while back, but she didn't come out to him until very recently. And so I talked to him about it. I was like, look, what pronouns do I use? What names do I use? What do you think is appropriate for me to do? And he ultimately said, look, I think she would be comfortable with you using she, her. She would be comfortable with you using the name Rebecca Pratt. And I'm like, okay. So just shouts out to Rebecca Pratt. I thank you for giving me my name, for dubbing me Liberal Dan. Apparently that was her shtick. She, one of the articles, the one that was more respectful of her and her identity, one of the hosts that knew her was basically like, she loved to give people nicknames. She loved to, she loved, and sometimes they were perhaps more vulgar than what my nickname was, but she loved to give people nicknames, and she would constantly do it. So I guess I'm touched and honored that I was one of the people who she gave a nickname to, and that nickname has stuck, and I've now been using that nickname for a very long time now, and I hope I don't know if we have the autopsy report yet. I don't know if anybody knows what the circumstances of her death was. Some people were talking about how she had some demons, how she, I don't know if there was alcohol or drug abuse. I don't know if she was depressed. I don't know if it was self-induced or if it was a mistake or whatever. But, I did want to just take some time during this podcast to I guess do somewhat of a memorialization of her, because people in the media have not been respecting her and her identity, and I've been a little bit upset about the fact that people aren't doing that. I mean, I reached out to some friends of mine, to a group of mine that I'm a part of, that I was like, how do I handle this? Because her original name doesn't seem like a dead name, but I don't want to be disrespectful to her. I don't want to be disrespectful to other trans folk. And basically the consensus was just go ahead and use she, her, go ahead and use her name as she identified as a trans woman. And that would probably be the safest way to do it. And that would be also to show other people who listen to your show that you are respectful of people and their identity. So here it is. Rest in peace, Rebecca Pratt. I'm sorry you had to leave the mortal coil so soon, and thank you for giving me the shove in this direction. And one of the things that really, I think the thing that Rebecca said once to me that I think meant the most to me was, this person was a shock jock back in the day up in Boston. This person, she had a radio voice, a very, you could tell this person had a good radio voice, that she was somebody who belonged on the radio. I'm not saying she had a face for radio. I'm just saying she belonged on the radio, and she knew the ins and outs. She knew Opie and Anthony way back in the day. They used to actually cite one of the bits that she used to use back in Boston. And one time, I think it was 99.5, WRNO was doing a live remote from one of our arena football. We used to have the Arena Football League here in New Orleans, and they were doing a live remote from there. And Rebecca let me come on, and we had a good 30 to 40 minute conversation until the commercial break, and I went back to go with my family. But the one thing she said to me that kind of stuck was, she was like, "You're really good at this. You are really good at talking on the radio. You do a very good job with this." And I took that as a really big compliment, because considering the fact that I wanted to be on the radio, I wanted to have a podcast, I wanted to be discussing the issues as we were discussing them, and to have somebody, especially somebody who was typically from the other side of the aisle, to have somebody who was doing this professionally tell me that meant a lot. So thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for being who you were. Thank you for giving me some encouragement and some kudos for what I had done, and for, I guess, giving me the push that I would need to to embrace the liberal Dan-ness. So that's it. That's my thoughts for Rebecca Pratt. Maybe I might shorten that up if I can, download it, edit it up, and just kind of give my thoughts on the passing of Rebecca Pratt. So again, thank you, Rebecca, for what you did, and I'm sorry to have seen you gone so early.